encampment. However, at this point, the resistance has been minimal. They've been faced with lots of flashlights and lasers, some other garbage thrown in their direction, but for the most part, they are managing to take down this barricade and take down the plywood, which has been blocking law enforcement from entering this encampment. This encampment has basically been under protester control completely for the past couple of days. It's an occupied zone in front of Royce Hall that now has a wall built on the east side as well as the west side, and now there are hundreds of CHP officers on both sides of the encampment as they tear away at this side of the encampment wall. We'll go ahead and pan over to the opposite side of Royce Hall, where there are, again, 100 or two more officers still trying to talk some sense maybe into these protesters who are preventing them from making their way up a narrow staircase to get into the quad here. Something is going off on the side. I don't know if it's fireworks or what, but something is going off. What is that? What is that? Is that bottle? Yeah, there's like some bottle rockets going off that are almost blinding up here, and it's coming from the edge there. So somebody's launching bottle rockets in some direction. I can't tell exactly where they're coming from. Anyway, you can see about 100 or so CHP officers on this side. I'm sorry, less lethal rounds being shot into the encampment. There are less lethal rounds being shot into the encampment. These are coming from CHP. These are coming from the CHP side of the wall, and as shots are being fired into the encampment. These are not bullets. These are less lethal rounds that are being shot into the encampment. That might be what was catching the corner of my eye here. Very, very bright, and you can see something being used to launch into this encampment. They have penetrated the corner here, but they have not quite made entry into all of those tents. You can see a lot of people milling about as they were trying to make their way down that staircase right there on the right-hand side of your screen. There were a couple of dozen students blocking their way, as well as a couple of dumpsters blocking the staircase, and at some point, the students ended up putting up their hands and helping in removing the blockade, allowing those officers down the staircase. Now making their way into the encampment, penetrating that plywood wall has proven to be a little bit more difficult, but you could see whatever is being launched into the encampment is producing a haze. It's producing a haze that you can see on the camera lens here. So something has been launched in there. It is creating a haze. We're now peering through the haze to try and get a better look at both sides of Royce Hall, where now hundreds of CHP officers are executing the dispersal order that was given at 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening. There was an unlawful assembly declared at around 6:15. A dispersal order has been repeated over the last 6 to 7 hours, and now finally CHP moving into position to try and penetrate this encampment and as peacefully as possible remove these students and protesters from this illegal, unlawful assembly. We're still looking through some haze here. It's also a combination of some low clouds that are moving through here as well. As we peer through this moisture, you can see they are still working at trying to get through there. I don't see any actual officers in the encampment just yet, but they are chipping away there at the edges of this encampment. There are groups of people under those tents. They have shields, they're wearing helmets. They've been preparing for this moment all day long, ever since the violence broke out on Tuesday night. They've spent the entire day refortifying this encampment and shopping for materials, PPE, goggles, helmets, umbrellas, you name it. We saw groups of fire extinguishers at the ready, just waiting to be put to use here tonight, and even signs pointing protesters in the direction of the various tents. At one point, we saw a tent that literally said, "Protection for tonight," as they were looking for some of the PPE to try and defend against tear gas and stuff like that. But you can see it does look like CHP is slowly and gradually making their way through these tents, through that wall, and finally they will figure out who's going to put up a fight here and who will be placed under arrest. There are dozens of LA County Sheriff's buses at the ready and waiting for processing and booking of however many arrestees they have to deal with at the end of this operation. But they are fully equipped. Law enforcement from the LAPD, the LA County Sheriff's Department, and the California Highway Patrol have been marshaling their forces all day long for the better part of the last 15 hours, getting into position as we've been waiting for this moment where they are finally executing that order to disperse this crowd and take down this encampment, which has just gotten to be too dangerous. We have seen a couple people detained, John, but as you can see now, we see some of this crowd starting to move away from the edge there as there's some smoke grenades going off. Not sure if it's tear gas or if it's just smoke, but we did count at least 1 or 2 people being placed in handcuffs when these CHP officers first arrived. Earlier, LAPD tried to make their way into the encampment. They actually were able to make their way up a staircase on the opposite side, and as they had to retreat because they were surrounded by protesters, there was some pushing and shoving, and one of the officers was hurt. Minor injuries. He was okay, but they did detain somebody temporarily at that point and eventually let him go. LAPD now holding that skirmish line. Again, that's all happening on the opposite side of the quad here. But now you can see these tents are starting to be moved and taken down as CHP is now within the perimeter of this encampment. John? Yeah, we're talking about at least about 300 by my estimation. We've seen about 5 buses pull in and drop these officers off, maybe even more than 300, but at least 300 by my count here. And you can see that now a little bit more of a line of scrimmage here as you have officers on the right, protesters on the left, and now a bit of a standoff right there at the perimeter. How much of a fight, how stubborn they're going to be is what we're going to find out here, but they are giving them every last opportunity to try and bring this to an end as peacefully as possible with as least amount of force as possible. You see them pulling the protesters. They're going to start doing it one by one and just peeling them off, hoping that they put up very little fight. And I think for the most part we could say that they have not encountered quite the resistance that you would expect, although they clearly are not being welcomed in by this crowd, and so they are in a position where they are using less lethal rounds. You can see objects being thrown in their direction. There are water bottles, there are other objects. It looked at one point like there wasn't a fire extinguisher that was tossed over there, but you can see clearly now about a couple dozen a couple dozen officers on the right there, and several dozen near the top of the staircase that are trying to penetrate the entrance to Royce Hall near the top left-hand portion of your screen there. So there are 2 groups of officers in this shot right here, and you can see a combination of smoke and cloud that is now coming in the way here that we're trying to peer through to try and get a better glimpse. But they are face-to-face with these protesters who are holding up umbrellas to prevent, basically shield themselves from tear gas, essentially. But they're just kind of grasping at those and tearing those umbrellas apart as well. Here's a fire extinguisher being used in the direction of those officers, John. Thank you. Yeah. That's exactly right. I don't know if they're going home exactly, but I think ultimately you're going to have a good portion that do manage to sneak out of here. And most likely you will be left with a core group of holdouts who are going to fight to the bitter end. But I think you're right about that. It's striking to me how methodically they're going about this. You know, there are a number of different tactics that law enforcement could take in a situation like this to break up any kind of a protest or a riot. This is not a riot at this point, but they are facing resistance. In this case, the rules of engagement are clearly such that they are using very kid-glove care on these protesters, despite the fact that they have a lot of obstacles and things being thrown and tossed in their direction. They clearly are, somewhat restrained here in terms of how they go about doing this. They're using the least amount of force as possible, as clearly must have been the directive in terms of making sure that there is minimal injury in this process. And that, I think, is really explains why this is happening so slowly and methodically, John. You get the impression, yeah. Yeah, you get the impression there's some kind of dialogue taking place there. Otherwise, they could easily force their way through here. Mind you, we should focus on this group here because there is a large group of well over 100 CHP officers who are being held back. They are not being welcomed up that staircase, a much narrower staircase that is proving to be very difficult for them to plow through. There's a crowd blocking their way, and they really aren't able to make their way up here. I almost wonder if they're going to make their way around, but now we're going to start to see some scuffles taking place at the leading edge of this protest. The holdouts are not going away peacefully, and so they are going to be pulled away. They're going to be peeled off of each other one by one if they continue to resist. So we're seeing some scuffles breaking out between police and protesters who are somewhat prepared, but again, not to the extent that these CHP officers are with their riot gear, John. All right, we are out of fuel. We're going to head back. You got it. Copy, copy. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Nice job, bud. Really? Oh, man, I don't even want to go home. Should I just tell Scott, yeah, take the day? Just, I know you were. Is it socked? Oh, we're good. Where's everybody else? I can't believe the other choppers didn't come in early. This is the Scott. Oh, smoking. Who's that? Who's? Uh, wow, wow. Yeah, that was no. It was great. It was great. That was great, guys. Oh, bro, good, perfect timing. Man, I was hoping they'd be done by now. This could be hours.